everyone, and welcome to another Sunday Talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. I'm one of your hosts, Nora Kyle, along with
the other one of your hosts, Mushtaq Ali.
And we want to thank you for joining us. Whether you're here live with us, we have a bunch of people here tonight, and you might be watching us on the replay on YouTube. In either case, you're awesome. You're so amazing for showing up for us, and we're glad you're here because we're going to be talking about some really cool stuff. Before we get to that, though, we got to do our YouTube spiel. Mushtaq, do you want to take the lead on that?
I might as well. So, if you're watching this on YouTube, first let me thank you for tuning in with us. And if this is your first time, let me encourage you to subscribe to our channel. There is a little button down here somewhere, and you can click it and subscribe and click the little bell to get notified when we put videos up. And we have a lot of fun videos this year for you. And let me tell you also that for those of you who actually get all the way to the end of this, there could be amusing prizes.
Amusing prizes, do you say?
I say amusing prizes, not every time, but at random intervals, there will be amusing prizes. And all you have to do is make it to the end of the video. It's cheating to just fast forward. But if you get to the end of the video, from time to time, there will be an amusing prize that you might win.
How can they win that? Tell us a little more about that.
If there is an amusing prize happening, all they have to do is make a comment down in the comments that they found the amusing prize key, and there will be a random selection of everybody who commented, and whoever wins gets the amusing prize.
All right.
The amusing prize could be anything. It could be, we might send you an incredibly cool book, or we might, who knows?
Who knows?
Let your imagination run wild, because it's crazy shit like that.
Yeah, we haven't done that kind of thing in a long time, so it'll be fun to get back to that. I'm looking forward to it. All right, cool. So
I should say that this is not going to count for those of you who are here with us live, because we are your amusing prize in that case.
One hopes anyway. One hopes. All right. So with that said, give us a thumbs up, thumbs down. That's cool too, if that's how you're feeling about our content.
Yeah.
Be honest with us. Leave a comment. Tell us what you're thinking about in regard to what you've seen on our video. Anyway.
And ask questions.
Yeah, always ask questions.
Yeah,
we really value that.
We will do our very best to answer every single question asked.
Indeed.
And reply to all of your comments.
We just about always do. Yep.
Yep.
All right. So this evening we are doing a follow-up talk. This is a part 2 to last week's talk, in which we talked about the Enneagram of Human Adulthood. So this evening we're going to be expanding on that. We're going to be getting a little bit more specific about how one can use this process and this Enneagram of a process of human adulthood to, words. What am I trying to say, Mushtaq? Help me out.
You're trying to say, first of all, that if you haven't watched part 1, stop this video right here and then go back and watch part 1, because otherwise you're not going to understand a damn thing we're saying.
Definitely would recommend that. Yeah.
Go back and watch part 1 all the way from the beginning to the end. To the beginning to the end. And then come back and watch this, because it'll make a lot more sense. Tonight we're going from the general that we used last week to the specific. We're going to drill down into each of the 9 points in the Enneagram more than a bit more. We're going to get into it.
And this should give you a sense more in terms of how to take action in this process. It's not just theory at this point. We're going to be delving more into what the process is like in action. All right.
And we'll be
So,
giving away secrets,
big secrets and little secrets.
big secrets and little secrets.
All right. Let's see. Ilmar asks, did you guys ever post the diagram from last time? Yes, we did. It was in the comments on the video from last week. So I say go to the 9-sided circle forum and you will find it in the comments on our posting of the YouTube link from last Sunday. Yep.
And that's where the Enneagram from this week will also be posted, is when I put up the video. In the comments, I will put a link to the Enneagram that we're using tonight.
Yep, and that was for our, for those who are watching on the replay, this was for our this was our February 28th talk last week. Wait, yeah, today's the 7th.
Today is the 7th.
So last Sunday's talk, part 1, was on February 28th. There you go. That'll make it easier to look it up when you go digging around for it, either on YouTube or on our Facebook forum.
Yeah, it's lucky that it wasn't on February 29th, because then nobody would be able to find it for 4 years.
Oh, secrets.
Yeah.
We were talking about secrets. Okay, so answer that question. Let us dive in, Mushtaq.
All right, let us dive in. And there was a pregnant pause while he waited for her to take the first leap.
Okay, so one thing we know about human adulthood is that it is pretty much critical to living a full-fledged life in the sense of being an active participant in your own life. And Mushtaq, you discussed with us 3 critical pieces to being a human adult last week. Do you want to remind us what those were?
Yes, they were the ability to future pace, the development of a true conscience, and the cultivation of loving kindness towards all things.
So from those focal points, we are going to be figuring out tonight how to tie those together through this Enneagram process that we will be showing you tonight. All right, Mushtaq.
All right, so I'm going to start out by reading you something from a fellow by the name of Anthony Demello. I don't know if you know Demello. He was a Jesuit priest of all things. He was born in Goa in India, and he died in 1986. Kind of mysteriously. I'm halfway convinced that the Catholic Church had him bumped off because he was disturbing. They actually made him put a disclaimer in all of the books that he wrote saying, this book is not suitable for Catholics. But if you're a martial artist or you've been around martial artists, you know that when martial artists get together, they talk about, always it comes down to the baddest dude, the baddest martial artist in the world, right? And it's usually Jean LaBelle, right? Jean LaBelle is like, he's beat up everybody in his life. He's choked out everybody. And so, you know, you get martial artists together and they talk about that. You get the enlightened folks together and they talk about who's the most enlightened person that they have ever run across. And inevitably, the name Anthony Demello comes up. He was like a little ray of light. He was very interesting. And he said this: most people, even though they don't know it, are asleep. They're born asleep. They live asleep. They marry in their sleep. They breed children in their sleep. They die in their sleep without ever waking up. They never understand the loveliness and beauty of this thing we call human existence. There's a quote for you. So what does that mean? asleep is the basic default state of humanity these days. And we're going to talk about, I'm pulling a lot from Gurdjieff tonight because he at least attempted in his broken English to come up with words that weren't in the Arabic or the Persian or the Turkish or the Russian to try and describe this stuff. And so we should say something about models.
Yeah, I was just thinking that myself. So one thing to remember when we talk about systems and models like this and the language that we're using is that they are just models. They are not necessarily the truth in capital letters. They are a tool. They are a methodology. As they always say, the map is not the territory. However, also I should mention, they are also kind of reflections of the time in which they're created. So we do need to keep that in mind as well. But that doesn't mean they are completely without merit, without benefit, shall we say. So we're hoping that you can bring that attitude into discussions like this so that we can see what we can get out of this material in a way that is both, critically thinking, but also open-minded and open to making connections between ideas. So there you go.
Yeah, and so this is a map. It's not the territory. In order for a map to accurately portray the entirety of the territory, the map has to be as big as the territory itself. Something to bear in mind. So you always selectively take something and leave something out. So Mr. Gurdjieff said that human beings have 4 states of consciousness. And I'm going to use my words for them, not his, because his words are pretty archaic in a lot of ways. So the first state that he talks about is sleep. That is the sleep that you do in bed at night, which has 2 phases, the dreamless sleep and the sleep of dreams. And the second stage of consciousness that I call somnambulism. Somnambulism is waking sleep. It is functioning on automatic through life. And he goes on to say, and this is accurate in as far as it goes, is that all regular human beings experience these 2 levels of consciousness. And he talks about his man 1, 2, and 3, which are just individuals who, here's that word again, cathect around either the moving center, the emotional center, or the intellectual center to build their personality. And at least in the words of his recorders, the people who recorded his words, he says there is no real difference between the 3. I mean, they're all asleep. They're just having different dreams or dreaming through different channels or various different ways of saying that. So here are these sleeps. There are 2 other states of consciousness, which Gurdjieff also goes on to say are going on all the time. It's just that we are not identified with them. We are not connected with them. We are so identified with the sleep of the machine that we never notice these other states. God, somebody is just going crazy on me. Let me shut this off.
I'm going to mute my phone too, just in case. There we go.
My phone is already muted. What the heck?
It's probably one of your whitelisted folks.
Yeah, it is one of my whitelisted folks. I'm going to do this, which is called turning my phone off. then nobody can send me stuff. Where was I?
We were talking about
Sleep.
Sleep. Yeah.
Which is what just happened for a moment there when I had to deal with that phone. I went on automatic, dealing with the phone. A little example of the sleep of the machine.
Being drawn back to it.
Yes.
Yep.
You were about to describe the third state.
Yes,
Yeah,
the
3
third
and
state.
4. Yep.
3 and 4. The third state of consciousness is what I call consciousness of the I, or consciousness of being. Gurdjieff called it self-consciousness, but I think that that is a crappy term, so I avoid it. This is where the work really gets done, which we will discuss momentarily. But this is where you develop something that is greater than just the personality construct that you have created around your lower centers. And it requires a fair bit of work. The fourth state of consciousness, I call it awakened consciousness. Gurdjieff called it objective consciousness, but I object to the term objective because it's not objective in the actual meaning of the word. There is no way that we can have true objectivity, as far as I can tell, because we have too many filters between us and the given. You know, we are driving around in our meat puppets, and there are too many levels of restraint to really allow us to experience truly objective beingness. So I call it the awakened state. This is different than the enlightened state. The enlightened state is, Neil made it.
Got it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I got it. What we call the enlightened state, or the state of permanent non-dual reality, is something else. This is the awakened state, awakening in the dream time, in Maya, being awake within all of the Maya around you, rather than waking up from the Maya. Here you can still go out on dates with Maya. In the enlightened state, Maya will no longer go out with you. She has taken you off of her list, wiped you out of her little black book, and is no longer interested in you. You have a thought, Noor?
I lost my thought. Don't worry about it. Yeah, there we go.
So any questions so far before I dive into the Enneagram here?
What do you think, guys? Do you have any questions or thoughts so far? Are you good to go? You can give a thumbs up if you're good to go.
Maybe a little.
All right, Nancy, yeah.
Okay. Maybe a little more about what it's like to be awake in the dream.
Have you ever had a lucid dream?
Maybe once.
That's what it's like, only while you're awake. It's very hard to describe unless you've experienced it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you've had a lucid dream, you're going along in your dream, and you know is whatever is going on, and you're in some place or another, and then all of a sudden you go, "Oh, I'm dreaming," and you become lucid in your dream, and you realize that you are interacting with a dream world. So the awakened state is exactly like that, only you do it in this level of reality instead of your internal dream. It is that moment when you realize that you have awoken from your sleep. from your somnambulism. Does that make any sense?
Some like noticing some common compulsion in oneself and other people when before you were naive about it.
No, it's more than that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's literally going, oh, I'm awake. Hot dang.
It is very similar to that feeling of having a lucid dream, like
Yeah.
within literal sleeping time. And you have that sense of, wow, that's weird. There's something weird going on here. And then you kind of take charge of it. So when that happens in not literally lying down in bed life, it's similar in that you are having that sense of, okay, hold up, I'm doing things unconsciously, and suddenly I realize that I'm aware of it. And now my behavior is what Gurdjieff would call self-conscious. But we're calling it something a little bit different, Mushtaq. We're calling it consciousness of being.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Gurdjieff says that this is where self-remembering happens.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess now I'm confused because I thought that your consciousness of I, of being, was your third state, not the awakened state yet.
It'll be in both.
It'll be in both. But
It'll be in both. In the third state, you start using your sense of being as the primary tool for awakening. And we'll get to that when we get to the Enneagram.
okay.
And there's also a sense of it just being glimpses, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to it being kind of an abiding way of moving through the world.
Yeah. When you are in the fourth state of consciousness, your sense of awakeness is abiding. It's not abiding non-dual awareness, but it's abiding awakeness.
Does that make a little more sense, Omar?
Yeah, and that clarifies that point.
Good.
I guess the other thing I was curious about was I thought that your second state was characterized by being mostly stimulus response actions.
Yeah, basically, it's the programming.
And by the third state, you're no longer functioning primarily.
Oh no, the
It's still
third state,
happening.
you're still dealing with your stimulus response actions, but you are at least dealing with them.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I will get to that when we get to the Enneagram.
Okay, cool enough.
Okay. All right.
Are we
So
ready for the Enneagram? Are
I think we are,
chomping
yeah.
at the bit?
Let's move forward, and then maybe people will have a little bit more understanding once
Yeah.
they see the diagram itself. Okay.
Okay, so let me pull this up. Now, this is the Enneagram from last week. There is that. Come on, close. Close. There we go. Here's the Enneagram from last week. We had just going around the timeline, understanding the problem, finding the tools, confronting the childhood programming, observing your programming, acting to decondition yourself, surrendering of conditioning, experiencing the adult state, acting from the adult state, and back to human adulthood. If you want to know more about that, go watch the first video. But tonight we have a much more nuanced Enneagram of this, and it looks like this. Up here, I have shown that this is both the 0 point and the 9 point, the starting and the finishing point. At point 1, we have encountering the idea of human adulthood. And you do that in some very specific ways. One of the things that this Enneagram is going to tell you is there's a few right ways to do this. There are hundreds of wrong ways to do this. And if you do it on any of the wrong ways, you're going to have to like erase some of your work and start over.
So when you say wrong or right,
yeah, does not take you where you want to go. That's wrong. Does not take you where you want to go. So here you are at the idea of, oh, there is human adulthood. And you go to 2, finding the specific practices of the work. And here I have also added encountering the school, because not all practices are the same. You go, oh, there is this human adulthood. I could become an adult. I think I'll go and do transcendental meditation. Maybe that'll get me there. And the answer is no, it won't. It will not get you there. It will reinforce your sleep. So at 2, you have to find the specific practices. And this is why it's called encountering the school. It's not a particular line of the work. It's any line of the work that actually still exists or is emergent, because there are emergent lines of the work now. There always are. So understanding that there is this idea of human adulthood, which is different than everything else. Human adulthood is different than cosmic consciousness. Human adulthood is different than deep meditation. Human adulthood is different from all of these things. And there are certain sets of practices that will get you there. And you need to find those practices, not just any old practices. Does that make sense? You don't have to agree with it. It just has to make sense at this point. And I can't see you guys, so Noor, tell me.
Yeah, I'm like trying to bring all my people up. All right. There we go. I got everybody. So how are we doing so far? Everyone on board with what we're talking about so far? Good. Okay. Everyone seems to be good to go forward.
Good. When you find the practices that will actually work towards this, you end up at point 3. Point 3 is the first of the shocks after. It's actually the second shock. The first shock is up here at 0-9. That's the idea of, oh, there is this idea of human adulthood that I've never heard of. And it resonates with you. I call point 3 the sacrifice of the sand grain. And I'm actually going to turn this off so I can look at all of you while I talk about all of this.
We'll come back to the Enneagram.
We will definitely come back to the Enneagram. So I'm going to tell you a couple of stories. The first is the story of Lucifer and God. So there are lots of stories about how Lucifer fell from grace and started a war in heaven and all of that. That's bullshit. Never happened. Let me tell you what really happened.
What really happened?
What really happened. God noticed that he was becoming identified with his creation. I mean, here you are the only being, right? Think about it. You are the being, and there is nothing other than you. There is no I, thou. There is just I existing in this I-ness. So you create a universe as a reflection so you can observe yourself. And of course, because this is now something that you could look at as if it were outside of yourself, even though it's complete hallucination, you have a universe. And it is very, very easy to fall asleep in identification with that universe. So God says, I need to solve this problem. I need to be able to exist within the universe without being sucked into it. And so he creates a twofold plan. The first plan is that he needs something to constantly remind him to be awake. And what he chooses is to take his most beloved creation to that point, which is Lucifer, and cast him from himself so that Lucifer, who is God's beloved, is always out there away from him. And so that constant reminder will be there. And the way he does it is very interesting because he creates humanity. And he creates humanity with a specific purpose. And that purpose is to be able to demonstrate the process of awakening. So that all God has to do is to watch the few people who are awakening themselves, to remind himself to stay awake. And then he says to all of his angels, bow down before this man who is my greatest creation. And of course, all of the angels and all of the jinn bow down before man, except for Lucifer. God says to Lucifer, why aren't you bowing down? And Lucifer replies to God, I cannot bow down to anyone other than you. It is not within me to do so. And so because Lucifer disobeyed God, God could then cast him out. And so he casts him out and he gives him great power, power equal to his own, they say, and dominion over the world. And so you have both the constant irritation of longing for the beloved that is forever separated from you, and the feeling the pain of the beloved for being separated from you, for not understanding even why they were cast out. And at the same time, you have this weird little hairless ape that has the ability to wake up. And every now and then one of them goes, pop, oh, hey, look. And you can feel that, and it is reflected back to you because all they are is your thought. So you are constantly reminding yourself of how to wake up and constantly having this irritant that allows you to stay awake. This is a complete myth, by the way. There's nothing real about this. This is a myth, but it's a myth that contains a kernel of truth. So bear that in mind. Now, Mr. Gurdjieff talks about this in a couple of places, most notably in, was it in Search of the Miraculous? I would have to go back and look, but he talks about realizing that he was going to sleep too much, and he wanted a way to make himself awake, to remind himself to stay up, to have that irritant. And so what he did was he took a vow to never, never, ever use the powers of hypnosis that he developed, because they made his life really easy. And by turning his back upon his abilities, he made his life much, much harder. But it was a constant reminder for him to stay awake, because he would go, oh, I need some money. And then he'd start to do the manipulations that he would usually do to allow money to come to him. And then he'd go, oh, wait, I can't do that. I have to stay awake, and it is my sacrifice of this ability of mine that keeps me awake. So there is Gurdjieff's microcosm of the macrocosm of this story. And so this point that we are talking about here, and I'm going to throw the screen back up again. the sacrifice of the sand grain.
Yeah.
It's called that because what creates the pearl in the oyster is a constant sense of irritation. And the oyster puts its attention on the irritation and forms the pearl as solidified attention, basically.
So Dave is describing this as perhaps playing the game of life on the hardest difficulty level.
That's actually a really good way to think about it. Gurdjieff probably wishes that he had computer game metaphors. Yeah, so that's a definitely a very good description of what's going on here. And it is a conscious sacrifice. And it is something that comes in from outside of the process, because it can be anything, any other process. So for Gurdjieff, it was the idea of hypnosis, of being able to, as the shadow says, cloud men's minds and use it to make his life really, really easy. So from that point on, his life was much, much harder.
So I remember someone commenting on our video last week about conscious suffering. Would you
Yes.
like to touch on that here, or would you like to hold off on that for later?
Yeah, let's hold off on that for a little bit later, but don't let me get out of here without addressing it.
Got it. No problem.
Okay.
Okay.
So when your will takes you through this shock, this is the shock of will, because you have to intend to make this sacrifice. You get to point 4. Point 4 is where you begin practicing self-observation. And the thing that you identify, that you observe, is I'm going to come back here. The thing that you are observing is the fragmentation of your eyes. Not these eyes, but these eyes in here. It's interesting because Gurdjieff described this 100 years ago. And science today is pretty sure that what he described is extremely accurate. Go ahead.
Yeah, this sense that the I that we think of as a unified sense of self, in terms of how the brain functions, it may be the case that there are actually many selves within, with different dislikes and likes and behavioral tendencies and all that stuff. But we create this story that unifies them consciously as a single unified I.
Yes. Mr. Gurdjieff said that there are 3 things that trick you into thinking that you have one I. That is, you have a body. And the body, no matter what eye is to the fore, gives the same sensations. You have the same name for most people for most of their lives. And so every one of Jonathan's many eyes is named Jonathan. And so whatever eye is forward, you go, oh, that's it. And third is all of the eyes have the same set of core habits. Now, it's interesting observing when this goes wrong. For those of you who don't know, I put myself through college and graduate school working as a psychiatric nurse. And I worked in some of the more interesting state and county hospitals out here in the West. And consequently, I've had a chance to interact with some people who actually were multiple personalities. And it became a fascinating study for me. One person who was a multiple, they said, it was like I was a mirror. and somebody took that mirror and threw it on the ground, and it shattered into 100 pieces, and each piece of that was another eye. Another person said, it was as if every one of these personalities that I have was connected through the center with a core, a rod that held them all together. And somebody came by and pulled that rod out, and they all scattered. And for people who have been, who have recovered from being a multiple, it is a process of putting each of those pieces back together again, gluing the mirror back together.
Yeah. So the contemporary name for multiple personality disorder is dissociative identity disorder, which pretty much says the same thing in a different way. You know, you have all these dissociated senses of self, and bringing them together again is similar to gluing those shattered pieces back together.
So I would suggest to you that each and every one of us has all of these multiple eyes, and that in order to see them, in order to begin to work with them, we first must observe ourselves.
Mm,
And as we observe ourselves, watch when the different eyes come up.
yes. So we have a question from
Yes.
Paylon. Well, first of all, Brian offers the word integration
Yes.
as, you know, this sense of reincorporating everything and from the fragments that we tend to function through. So Paylon asks, is multiple personality related to different personas?
Yes.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
I could talk for the rest of the hour on this, but Paylon, ask me tomorrow, and I
Yeah,
can give you details on it. I don't want to get too lost in that.
yeah. But that's a good question, and I will make note of it for maybe a future talk, perhaps. So thank you so much for that, Paylon. All right. So as you were saying, Mush Talk, integration, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So first we have to identify them. And that means that you have to watch your own behavior. And you have to watch it in a particular way. And at the end of this video, I will put up the video talks that we've done on self-observation and self-remembering and all of that kind of stuff, because they're useful to review them. But the process of self-observation is what you do to begin to see where you switch personalities. Now, going back to the Enneagram, once you have done this, and here's crossing the equator, we get to what is called, what Mr. Gurdjieff called building the magnetic center. This is, he gives fairly poor descriptions of it, or his students do. This is where you create the will to work in yourself. The desire, the will, the constant bringing back, and you use self-remembering to begin to reintegrate all of these fragments of yourself with the goal of creating one unified I. Point 5 here is called the point of most attention, because this is where the hardest work comes into play. So, building the magnetic center is moving away from the first 3 qualities of personality, from what Gurdjieff called man 1, 2, and 3. I hate those terms because it's not just men, it's women too. He was sexist and chauvinistic like everybody else 100 years ago, but we
That's
have
why
his
we've
language.
been
Yeah.
using the word human instead, because that includes everybody.
Everybody,
This is
male,
relevant to.
female,
Non-binary.
non-binary, whatever you got, humans, all humans. So building the magnetic center to create this framework around which something else can crystallize, to use his terms, and begin to unify the I. So there are less and less unconscious pieces of it. And this gets us to right here, point 6. This is the second shock. This is the shock that requires grace, surrender. The Prophet Muhammad said, "Man is asleep. He will not awaken until he dies." And then he said, "Die before you die." This is the shock that allows you to create a wholeness. And it is a literal death in a certain sense, in the same way that the death of the caterpillar is the emergence of the butterfly. The process that you use to get through this is what we call self-witnessing. And again, you can read it, you can watch the videos that I've done on that, Noor has done on that, which will save us a bunch of time here. When you get through this shock, you experience the adult state. And once you experience the adult state, you get to act from the adult state. Acting from the adult state gets you to the sense of human adulthood, which takes you out on a whole different, higher level Enneagram than this one. The thing to remember about the 0-1 point is it's cyclical. You know, it doesn't just stop here. When you get back to this point, when you've completely completed a process, it takes you into another process, a higher order process.
Sometimes I liken that to a spiral. You know.
Yes. Spiral is a good way to think of it, because we like up and down. We are creatures of gravity. Now, the important things here we see in the moving lines. When we look at encountering the idea of human adulthood, we look back to 7 and forward to 4. The only way you can encounter human adulthood is from somebody who is experiencing it or has experienced it, because you can encounter this in a book. You know, you read Anthony Demello's books or you watch his videos and you will be encountering an adult human being, for instance. When you look down to 4, this idea of intense self-observation tells you what you need to look for in finding the tools of the school. At point 2, look back to 8. The only tools that work for you are created by those who act from the adult state. And again, this tells you the tool that you have to pull out of the box first. When we get to 5, building the magnetic center, we have to remember these two things: experiencing and acting from the adult state. If you lose that as the guiding principle for what you're doing, you're probably going to have to work to redissolve your magnetic center and rebuild it again. And that's never fun.
Is there anything you'd like to say about the magnetic center?
It's a lousy name for what I'm talking about, but I don't have anything better at this point. It is, okay, let me get this off so I can look at you guys. So if I have a glass of water that is super saturated with sugar that has been dissolved into it, the sugar remains in suspension until I drop one crystal, one sugar crystal, into the glass of water. One more crystal that can be dissolved into the water. When I do that, all of the sugar, rather than, I mean, it can't be dissolved, so there's a crystal sitting there, and all of the sugar begins to form a bigger and bigger crystal around that first seed. You can do it with a string too. There's a
That's
thing
how you
called,
get the rock candy
yeah, the
sugar.
rock candy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very pretty, actually.
Yeah. And in traditional Persian Sufism, it is very symbolic. It's symbolic of the barakah, of the blessing that one gets through this process.
I didn't know that. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, they use a couple of things. One, when you receive bayat in certain initiation in certain Sufi orders, you bring the sheikh some gifts. You bring them some sugar, rock candy. You bring them a nutmeg, whole nutmeg. You bring them a ring. You bring them a coin, and you bring them a length of white cloth. Each of these has symbolic meanings that we don't need to go into right now, but remind me at some other point and we can talk about those. How are we doing so far?
Good so far. Any questions?
Yeah.
Omar, yeah.
Back to point 4 there. You were saying, if I understood you correctly, that these different eyes or identities, whatever, have a common set of core habits.
Yes, I said that.
What these core habits might be like?
They will be very, very primitive. And that's probably the best I can say about them right now. Make another note, Noor, that we need to do a talk on the fundamental core habits of humans.
Sure, you got it.
Some of this you find in like the Enneagram of the chief feature. Because a lot of the core habits are found in the Enneagram of personality, so-called.
Okay. All right. And I also have a quick question about your point number 5. Obviously you're going to talk more about building this magnetic core, but you were suggesting, I thought at one point, that there is like a framework around which is being built, which supports this building. Can you talk a bit more about what this framework?
Yeah, I can give you Gurdjieff's metaphor first, okay, which is he talks about, if I'm remembering correctly, because I don't use this metaphor, but it's good for this moment. He says that the astral body, what he called the Kejdan body, is formed around the magnetic center. And that allows you to do certain things. The whole metaphor of all of these bodies doesn't work for me because it isn't real.
But you hold that there is some kind of a framework there?
There is some kind of a framework. It's like that seed crystal. You create this opportunity to have the seed crystal that begins to cathect the single eye around it. And you can think of all of the sub-personalities as the sugar molecules in the water that begin reattaching themselves to this crystal at this point in 5.
Again, we might use the word integration at that point.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I wonder, does it have anything to do with like a common purpose that
no
these personalities then have? Or
nope.
I don't have a good feel for this framework thing, I guess.
Yeah, that's probably because we aren't doing a really good job of describing it at this point. We're just touching on it.
Okay.
Just thinking about it as like a group of competing desires in which you can only act out one of them. I want to go, like, I'm cold, so I want to go get a sweatshirt. I'm thirsty, so I want to go get a drink. They're in two different locations. I can only do one. I have to choose one, but the other one is sort of still there. And that's a very simple example, but there's always competing thoughts, desires, things pushing you in a direction. And you can only act out, since you're a finite being, a set of them, and they're sort of always at war to try and get your intention and sort of move you in a direction. Is that
That's exactly
anywhere
right.
close?
That's very close. I knew I could count on you, Brian.
Okay, that still leaves me with a question. I mean, my impression was that this framework was in some sense an aid to the integration process.
No,
It's
no.
not.
Let go of the idea of framework. Forget I even used that word.
It's gone.
It's gone.
Oh.
It will be. It's too confusing. So
Good enough. That's all I got on my plate right at the moment.
okay. So how are we doing? Does this make last week become more clear? What do you think, guys? Talk to me.
Shall I call on people?
Call on people, my dear.
All right. Chris, what are your thoughts about our talk tonight? What are you chewing on?
I'm still curious on this magnetic center, what the nature of it is, and to learn more about it. And I do think that this is an important talk to bring together things that were discussed last time. And I'm also curious on these states of consciousness that were talked about before, how you would define being. There's the different ways I've seen this one approached. And so I'm curious about some of these things.
How would I define being? Being is another name for the Tao. That's how I would define being.
Which is to say, it's difficult to talk about it because
Yeah.
it is more.
Being is like pornography. I can't quite tell you what it is, but I know it when I see it.
Is there an associated perception of that? I mean, some people talk about a sense of being present. Is there something like that?
Goodbye, Zainab.
Yes, as Brian says, the Tao that can be talked about is not the true Tao.
Yep.
Who gets to suck on the rock candy that's made?
Don't take the metaphor too far.
Okay.
It's a yummy metaphor, though.
It is a yummy
Well,
metaphor.
No, it's the idea that God put us in this solution of sugar crystals. So, and it's our job to recrystallize them out. And
Yeah. What you'll discover is as you recrystallize them out, you're getting a unified I, a unified personality, a unified sense of your own individuality. And underneath that is still being. I may have to do something on Ibn al-Arabi.
You probably should.
He always makes me bilious.
He does he?
Yep. Pelan, you look very thoughtful.
Combining adulthood with personalities and personas and pulling all the identities together into one, that piece of information was new to me.
Ah,
I'm still chewing on that.
yeah. To be an adult is to still have a personality. To be an adult is to know that that personality is not you and you can wear it like a cheap suit or like fancy evening wear. So, Pelan, you remember a few weeks ago, we were all out together and you were wearing clothes that were not usual to what we usually experience you in, right? And you were stunning in them,
Thank you.
but you were still just you. There was no difference in the core Pelan, even though you were wearing clothing that expressed a certain aspect of you more clearly than other aspects. So your clothes, you could say, is your I, and the one who chose the clothing is your being. Maybe.
I think that's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah.
It's again, models. We're talking about
I'm making it up
models.
as I go, so it doesn't mean
Yeah.
that this is absolute truth or anything. It's just the best way I can come up with saying it at the moment.
Or
To an extent, wouldn't you have to continue to affect things like that? Because the way in which it sounds is the vast majority of people are asleep, and an awake person has to interact with a majority asleep world that is affecting personas constantly. How does an awake person deal with that if they're not somewhat reflecting those personas back?
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And it's rare that you don't do that. I mean, I have one person I can just do that with now, which is my buddy Larry, or Lawrence as we know him. And he and I will sit on the phone for a half an hour and not say anything. We will just be in each other's presence, and it is incredibly comfortable. But for dealing with people outside of somebody who is that rarefied, yeah, you have to be wearing clothes that will not freak them out. And it's the clothes metaphor kind of holds together, because like if you went to your son's soccer match and you were wearing biker gear with chains and studs and knives and all of this kind of stuff, it would still be you, but people would look at you funny. So being able to slip into the persona is a nice thing. But knowing that you're doing that is part of adulthood. And knowing the consequences of of projecting that particular persona. Or that aspect of your persona. Yes, Ilmar?
So the magneticized result is not a single persona, right? I mean, you're still playing with multiple personas.
Well, but you're integrating them.
You're integrating them in the sense that
you are pulling sugar molecules out of the water to form a crystal.
Yeah. So they're not at odds with each other anymore? Is that, I mean, because I view these identities most as habit patterns. Okay. So
yeah, and that's another way to look at them, though. Modern neuroscience says they're actual subpersonalities.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you each of them has their own habits. They are not habit patterns, but they have their own habits. Dave, do you have a better word for magnetic center? Have you come up with anything that actually makes more sense? Because I'm struggling with this one.
No, in a way, it's kind of, I like it because it's like you can use gravity to describe certain concepts on another level, and it functions well because we understand that as a species. So magnetism works even if it leads to improper understanding too. I think for me, one of the best riffs on all of this was a very long time ago, your and Kyle's talk on the destiny versus fate.
Ah, yes, that's a good one.
For me, like the specific type of habit clusters that bind you to fate are what stop your magnetic center forming. So you, in fact, you fuck off the magnetic center idea of forming anything, and you think about taking the handbrake that stops it forming off. So you focus on the specific habit clusters that block destiny arising out of fate. And then once you have jumped over the thing, you have the felt experience of the difference. It's really hard to relate to anyone who hasn't experienced it, but the people who have, nothing needs to be said really, or you can actually have a true discussion. But until that happens, it just encounters the confusion of tongues phenomena, and that people will think, oh yeah, I have that. But then you look and it's the pornography thing, is like, but that person hasn't had this. But you don't want to tell them because it will make, it's mean to tell them, like, but it's also like, when you meet someone who has actually done that, it's very clear, like incredibly clear, and you can talk on a different level. And so I have a few people like this, and the degree at which you converse and get these ideas across is exponentially increased. And so for me, the term magnetic center is what I use at the moment. I have a feeling one of my friends will create a better word because he's much better at words than I am. But it's the aspect of focusing on what blocks destiny rather than focusing on what is this thing. You don't really need to know what it is. You just need to remove the blocks from it arising. And then you can talk about it later. Maybe one of you will be able to describe it, but you focus on removing destiny chelation material from the organism.
Actually, that's a really good way to describe it, because it is very much more like removing something than creating something.
We are definitely going to chew on that. Thanks, Dave.
Yep, Dave gets a gold star for the talk.
Cool. All right. But no mystery prize. Dave is sad. He wants a mystery prize.
The talk is not over yet. Of course, I got to be careful. I will say I've changed my mind. Anybody who is here can apply for the mystery prize too when we have them, because otherwise everybody's going to be not showing up to the talks in hopes of getting the mystery prizes, because we give very cool prizes.
We've given out some pretty cool rare books in the past. So, yeah. I mean, who knows what will come up. We said you should be curious about it, but just saying. So now you don't have to feel left out, Dave. There you go. All right, any other questions or thoughts?
Yeah, is this clear enough? We have not heard from Cherie nor
Chris
Neil.
is joining in, but I mean, yeah, go for it, Chris, and then I'm gonna poke at other people.
In talking about creating wholeness, I'm reminded of Jung's individuation. It sounds like there's a lot of similarities here.
There's probably some similarities, but Jung's individuation is only halfway there.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, I think there's some overlapping or some like shared qualities, let's say, but I do think that individuation is not quite there. It's not just about you and your self-fulfillment or whatever. Like, this goes beyond that.
Within my understanding of of what Jung's talking about. It's, I guess, less so much like self-actualization and more creating a wholeness from the many within. But it still sounds like maybe that's not totally what you're referring to here.
I mean,
Totally.
I do think that's part of this process is as we were saying earlier, talking about that integration of these dispersed aspects of oneself. You're kind of forming some cohesive sense of all these dispersed senses of self into something that you can look at and say, oh, I'm doing that thing, you know, whatever it might be. You're more conscious of those things. So in that sense, yeah, you are, what's the word you were using? But yeah, I mean, I think all in all, I do think there is overlap. I do think there is some of that self-actualizing stuff in human adulthood as a process, but it's definitely not the end point. Let's put it that way. Yeah. All right. So thanks for that question. Neil, how's it going with you? Do I need to unmute you or do you got it? Okay. All right. So no questions from you, Neil? Oh, you're tired. That's right. It's like 4 a.m. for you. Okay. I'm cutting you some slack. Shri, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share today?
Hi. As someone who's just very new to all of these things, I feel like I'm a little baby, and I love Dave's comment on letting go versus trying to identify and label things, because I find I can get hung up on that. And I like the idea of, this is my overall impression as someone who's just a baby in the work, that, you know, having an irritant instead of trying to remove it all the time is actually so useful, and to use it and embrace it, to be able to be brave into diving into things that are difficult, that are really annoying, and those kinds of things. And the idea of going around the Enneagram and knowing that at 7 and 8, if you don't have the right teacher who's actually behaving as an adult, then you're just going to repeating the same bad habits. You need someone who's actually helping you recognize what is possible in yourself, because you won't be able to see it by yourself. And if you think you can, you really are kidding yourself. That was my impression, that it is important. And once you have removed those treasured, and this is, you know, those precious things in your life, your opinions, your ideas of yourself, your habits, those precious things that you really hang on to because that's your identity, if you can let that go, it makes room for other possibility. What is the other possibility that will unfold for you? And you won't know it unless you can make room for that. That's my impression.
Yeah, and that's, it brings up a very good point. Gurdjieff talks about, he says, maybe you could get a group of 20 people together and each of you can try and keep the other awake. But this is probably not going to work, because if you are all in your larval state, you're all going to go to sleep. You need to have somebody who can actually stay awake to guide you. And that's important. And that goes back to points 1 and 2 on this Enneagram. If you find the wrong people, you're going to be wandering off in a weird direction for a while. And, you know, there are thousands of wrong people out there. You can sit around and chant Hare Krishna for, you know, several lifetimes before you realize that you're just chanting Hare Krishna and Krishna doesn't care.
Yeah, I mean, he also says you could fill a whole library with books of ideas and theories that you created in your sleep. So when we think about that in terms of, you know, teachers that are available and practices that are available. It's the same thing. Like there's a lot of sleep inducing things out there that are being passed out as though they are useful and are going to get you where you want to go. And it is rarer by far to find people and resources that are coming from the perspective of the awake state.
Yep. We've mentioned a few. You know, you could do worse than reading, or Anthony Demello only ever had one video of him teaching, which is brilliant, but there's only one. And then there's a few books. But they're there. If our friend Lawrence ever gets to where he needs to be to have an internet connection, then we are making sure that you have access to him, because he's fun to talk to. And there's a few others out there. It's one of the reasons that Nora and I are going to be doing the interviews that we're going to be doing this year, is so to introduce you to interesting people who you can benefit from hanging out with. And some of them are going to be quite different from what we do. One of our first interviews is going to be with a woman who does Ennea type therapy. And she does things that by all rules I should really dislike. But I look at her and the place she's coming from, and it actually works. So we got that going on. We have a friend who is she teaches public speaking. And those of you who know that words are magic. And so we decided that we want to get her to talk about the magic of being able to speak. And a few others. You might be surprised who we get.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I'm glad we're going to be doing that.
Yeah, me too. It means I can talk less. You can talk less, and other people can talk more.
Yeah, and that will be fun.
Okay, so here's the big surprise at the end. There will be a mystery surprise.
Ooh, you know, I just want to touch on this, and maybe we will just link to it, but conscious suffering, because we did a talk on that. But
yes, we did a talk on that, and it upset some people because Gurdjieff used to talk about intentional suffering.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what people didn't know is that he intentionally switched the two things around. And he did it specifically to weed out the people who were just placeholders, who were just following blindly and never questioning.
Yeah. So that certainly has a place.
Yes.
On the path to human adulthood.
It has a very important place. And we're going to be doing a lot of links and cards and all sorts of things popping up. So
yes. So hopefully that will answer some questions, because it is relevant. It is highly relevant. But we only have so much time to talk in an hour and a half. So there you go.
So
all right. So there you go. Go for it.
And now we have the secret mystery surprise. If you make a comment on this video and you end the comment with the word Kejdan, Kajdan, then you are entered into the drawing for the special secret prize, which is a monograph that I wrote way back in, I think, 1986, that I've decided to update. And you will be gifted with a copy of it. Strange and unique information on the Enneagram that nobody gets. So there you have it.
Secrets.
Secrets.
Yes,
Who
big
knows,
and
I may
small.
give it to everybody who comments like that.
So there you go. Juicy mysteries and juicy conversation. I think we talked about a lot of kind of heavy stuff in the sense that this is difficult work. This is stuff that we spend our day-to-day avoiding, in a sense. That's what sleep is. So
Yeah.
it should be interesting to, you know, at the very least, if this is not work we're already doing, to become curious about that work.
Yep. But yeah, this is definitely not of the part of the work that has the puppy dogs and fluffy bunny rabbits and stuff. We'll talk about that again soon.
Yeah.
There are puppy dogs and bunny rabbits.
All right, so there we go. We got any last thoughts, Mush Talk, before we wrap it up?
I'm hungry.
He's hungry. I'm hungry too, actually. I'm thinking salad.
Yeah, that sounds
good. We will put it on Brady Bunch mode and wave goodbye to everyone. How about?
We've been on Brady Bunch mode.
Oh,
I wanted
good.
everybody to have a chance to be part of this. So
good.
bye,
All right.
folks.
Bye. See you guys next week.